Okay, so 2 weeks ago, we went over the big picture look of the nation of Israel beginning in Genesis 12, when God promised Abraham some things, and that how those affected the nation of Israel becoming a nation again. For 1900 years, there would, if you pulled out a map, there would be no Israel on the map. And then in 1948, they became a nation because of Great Britain and the United States. And how some of the things that God promised Abraham are still not fulfilled for the nation. And this week we're going to look at history again, but we're going to look at about 300 years, from 900 BC to about 640 BC, those 300 years in there. And I think it will help us to understand when Daniel opens up, it says that Nebuchadnezzar came down and he took people captive, including Daniel, back to Babylon. And so we're trying to understand, why did that happen? And then next week we're going to get a little closer to the history, to what was going on around the time of Daniel living. And then the rest of our time we will spend in Daniel, except where it cross-references to other books in the New Testament. So that's our process, and we'll get as far as the lessons go. So those lessons are for you except for Dawn. I am checking Dawn's lesson, but everybody else, they're for your benefit, and you can use them, you can not use them. And when we come, I will give you a variation of the lesson that you had for the week. And if you're interested in looking at that and going through it, it's great. But I don't want you to feel, except for Dawn, that you're gonna have to do that, okay? All right.
She has to do it
Huh?
in triplicate.
She does, exactly, Jen. Okay, so turn with me to 1 Kings 11, 1 through 6. And in 1 Kings 11, we're gonna read some things about Solomon. And if somebody would read that.
Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women, from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the sons of Israel, "You shall not associate with them, neither shall they associate with you, for they will surely turn your heart away after their gods." Solomon held fast to these in love, and he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned his heart away. And it came about, when Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart away from after other gods, and his heart was not wholly devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the detestable idol of the Ammonites. And Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not follow the Lord fully, as David his father had done. I see why nobody wanted to read.
Sorry, I was still trying to get my app open.
Exactly. But you could butcher all those names and we don't use them,
Yeah.
so who would know, right? Okay, so we found out something. God warned Solomon. What did he tell Solomon? What did he tell Solomon?
Stay away from those women.
Yep. Stay away
Foreign women.
from foreign women.
Their gods. Other gods.
Yeah, and why did he tell him to do that?
Because they turn you away.
There's different.
So it turned his heart from God. And so he warned him, he told him, and what did Solomon do with that warning?
Not much.
He did it.
He
He disregarded it.
totally disregarded that warning. And so he had how many wives? I mean, seriously.
700, he deserved what he.
Exactly.
That's
700
like-
wives.
Is that just-
And how many concubines did he have?
Three.
My goodness, 1,000, really? Okay.
Yeah.
So, because of them turning his heart from God, what did he do for them regarding their worship?
He started following.
Okay, he started following, but what else did he do?
Started sacrificing and all that to their gods.
Yeah, he created a place for them to worship their gods in the nation of Israel. Okay? So let's look at 10 through 13, and let's see how God responds. What do we see? And that should be 11, 10 through 13. There's a typo there.
Although he had forbidden Solomon to follow other gods, Solomon did not keep the Lord's command. So the Lord said to Solomon, "Since this is your attitude and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees which I commanded you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. Nevertheless, for the sake of David your father, I will not do it during your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son. Yet I will not tear the whole kingdom from him, but will give him one tribe for the sake of David, my servant, for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen."
Okay, so because of Solomon's choice to ignore what God said, God said, what was his punishment going to be? He was going to lose what?
Lose his kingdom.
Yeah, he was going to lose his kingdom.
Everything.
And if you look at this chart, that I gave you, it's crazy that the kingdom really starts with Saul. I mean, when they had a king, Saul was their first king. And this is at the bottom. And then David is their second king. And Solomon is the third king in the nation. And he's warning them that after he is no longer king, in his son's time, the kingdom is going to be divided. It's really a short period of time. So, in 931 BC, that's when the kingdom was divided, okay? And Jeroboam was a servant in the kingdom, and he went to he went to Rehoboam and said, "Hey, you're taxing us too much, and we don't want to pay those taxes." And Rehoboam said, asked for advice, and he got some advice from older people and younger people. And who was wiser? If anybody read that, did anybody know who was wiser?
All the old people.
The old people, that's exactly right. So we're just saying there's old people in this room. But,
Where?
Mom. And so he took the advice of the younger people and said, tax them more. And so they rebelled, and Jeroboam became king of 10 tribes. And just like God said, he was going to leave a small group under Rehoboam's leadership. There's 2 tribes, and it was Benjamin. Do you know what the other tribe was, anybody? Judah, that's right. Okay. So let's go, I want to go down to, no, let me tell you this. I'm going to answer these questions just because I want to have a little bit more time farther into the lesson.
So,
Yes, sir?
on these, what was the reason he gave the people?
So if we would read this 1 Kings 12, 25 through 31.
Right.
Jeroboam, he sets up, so they're supposed to go to Jerusalem 3 times a year to do the feast, and that was a command of God. They're supposed to, but he didn't want them to go to Jerusalem. Why would he not want them to go to Jerusalem if he's in charge of 10 tribes? Any ideas?
Because their sacrifices would tie them to David. Right?
Yeah, that's exactly.
He didn't want that.
Exactly. He was afraid if they went back there that they would want to rejoin the kingdom. of Judah and Benjamin. And so he decided, okay, I'm gonna set up this sacred place for you here in Bethel, and they weren't gonna go back to Jerusalem. And he was doing that, saying, hey, this is really convenient for you, you don't have to go to Jerusalem. But his motivation was, he was afraid he was gonna lose his kingdom. Okay, so I want to read 2 Kings 17:6. On this chart, it lists the kings in here, and you'll notice the list of the northern kingdom. Not one of those kings was good. Not one in the northern kingdom. So what does 2 Kings 17:6 say?
In the 9th year of Hosea, the king of Assyria, sorry, I think for a second, captured Samaria and carried Israel away into exile to Assyria and settled them in Hala and Harbor on the river of Gozan and in the cities of the Medes.
She didn't learn from that first reading.
Well,
I know.
So what he's telling us what happens to the northern kingdom here. We've jumped ahead a couple hundred years. And what is he saying happened to the northern kingdom?
Captured by the Assyrians.
Yeah, the Assyrians came down and captured them and took them into Assyria. Okay? So that is 722 BC. So the northern kingdom is now gone. And let's look at 2 Kings 17:7-9 and see why God allowed that to happen. What do we see in 17:7-9?
All this took place because the Israelites had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up out of Egypt from under the power of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. They worshipped other gods and followed the practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before them, as well as the practices that the kings of Israel had introduced. The Israelites secretly did things against the Lord their God that were not right. From watchtower to fortified city, they built themselves high places in all their towns.
So why did God allow the northern kingdom to go into captivity in Assyria?
Because they weren't worshiping him, they were worshiping the idols and gods of other nations.
They returned to their captors, so he just let them have it.
Okay. And they did. I mean, every time we would read, if we would read, we'd go, idol worship, idol worship, idol worship. It was rampant in Israel. And so God just, and what did they violate relationally with God?
They walked in the customs of the nations whom the Lord had driven out before the sons of Israel.
They violated the 10 Commandments.
Yes.
Other gods before me.
Yes. They violated the 10 Commandments. So if we look at the history of the 10 Commandments, we would go back to Exodus. They're supposed to go into the nation of Israel, but God gave them, or Moses gave them, the 10 Commandments. And what are the first two 10 Commandments?
No other God before me, and
Love
Yeah.
God.
Yeah. No idols, and no other God before me. And let's read it. Let's go to Exodus 20.
Love God. It's gonna be number one, family.
What is Exodus 20?
You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make yourself a carved image, like any likenesses of anything that is in heaven above, or that is earth beneath, or that is the water in the water under the earth, and you shall not bow down to serve them.
Okay, so he clearly, now when Moses gave them the 10 Commandments here, the people said, this is good, this is teaching us how to relate to God, and if we go through the list, God's teaching them how to relate to people, and the people said this is good. And this is what we find that they break, the covenant that they went into relationship with God over. They said, we'll do this, and God said that you'll be blessed. But if you don't keep the commandments, then these are the things. And we looked at those a couple of weeks ago about what's going to happen, and what did we read specifically that would happen to them if they broke the 10 Commandments?
They lose their land.
They would lose their land, and what would happen to the people?
They'd be scattered.
They'd be taken into foreign lands. Okay? Alright, so we see that that's exactly what happened here. Assyria takes the northern kingdom captive. Let's look at 2 Kings 21:8. Before we read that, let me ask you this question. I skipped over it, sorry. How was God patient with Israel and Judah? We often see God in the Old Testament described as not being patient and not being loving, and not, how do we see his patience with Israel and Judah?
He kept coming to them and saying, look, just do what we agreed upon, and things will be good. And he did that over and over.
He did it over and over and over again. Okay?
He told my friend he was a jealous God.
Deuteronomy, which we read 2 weeks ago, pieces of, was written 700 years before they were taken into captivity. That's long suffering and warning. Okay, let's look at 2 Kings 21, 1 through 7, and let's see what Judah's response was once the northern kingdom was taken captive.
Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king, and he reigned 55 years. That's the right one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And he reigned 55 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was and he did evil in the sight of the Lord, according to the abominations of the nations whom the Lord had cast out before the children of Israel.
Through 7.
Through 7.
Yeah.
For he rebuilt the high places in which Hezekiah his father had destroyed. He raised up altars for Baal, and made a wooden image, as Ahab king of Israel had done, and he worshipped all the hosts of heaven and served them. He also built altars in the house of the Lord, of which the Lord had said, in Jerusalem I will put my name. And he built altars for all of the hosts of heaven in the 2 courts of the house of the Lord. Also he made his sons pass through the fire, practice soothsaying, use witchcraft, and consulted spiritists and mediums. He did much evil in the sight of the Lord to provoke him in anger. He even set a carved image of Asherah that he had made in the house of which the Lord had said to David and to Solomon his son, in this house and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, I will put my name forever.
So where did he put that statue of the Ashtaroth? Where did he put it?
The temple.
In the temple. And so everywhere they went, there was, and he ruled how long? How long did Manasseh rule?
55 years.
Yeah, 55 years. This is the culture, this is the environment, this is the influence that he had on the nation, and this was central to their culture, was idolatry.
Can I ask you a question? Real
Sure.
quick? So what does it mean to pass through fire? Because Jesus talks about that too.
They were actually sacrificing their children.
Through burning on the altar.
They were that's how
Wow.
bad it was. There was
Wow.
witchcraft. There
Wow.
was, and they sacrificed their children to these foreign gods.
Wow.
That's how awful it had gotten. Let's look at 2 Kings 21:8, and what do we see? What is the promise that they're given, even though this is what is culturally going on? What do we see in 8?
I will not make the feet of Israel wander any more from the land which I gave their fathers, if only they will observe to do according to all that I have commanded them, and according to all the law that my servant Moses commanded them.
So what is God saying to them in the face of what we just read?
Follow the 10 Commandments. You'll be back.
Even though you did all this, I will still give you the land that I promised.
Yeah, he's still
All you have to do
reaching.
is turn.
Go ahead.
All you have to do is turn back to me.
Yeah, he's still reaching to them. He is still calling them to himself. And it really shows how God felt about the nation. How did God feel about the nation of Israel?
Loved it.
Love them. And let's look at verse 9 and see how they respond.
But they did not listen, and Manasseh led them astray to do more evil than the nations had done, whom the Lord destroyed before the people of Israel.
Okay? And which kingdom are we talking about? Which Manasseh is a king over which kingdom?
The northern tribe.
Assyria.
Southern.
So,
Yeah, that was a good guess. Ding, wrong. So the northern kingdom is already gone into captivity, and they went into captivity because of idolatry. So here is Judah, knowing that their fellow Jews are in captivity, and they're doing the same thing, and it is getting really ugly. Okay, so now let's look at 2 Kings 21:10-12 and see God's warning to them. He asked them to turn, and here's his warning.
The Lord said through his servants the prophets, Manasseh king of Judah has committed these detestable sins. He has done more evil than the Amorites who preceded him, and has led Judah into sin with his idols. Therefore this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I am going to bring such disaster on Jerusalem and Judah that the ears of everyone who hears of it will tingle.
Okay, so what is he saying?
Not gonna be good.
I'm gonna beat you so bad your mom's gonna. That's what he's saying.
He really is. And again, they're doing this, they're living this way, and they've already seen that result for the northern tribe. So even though they know that's what happened to them, they're living this way. And he's continuing to warn and warn them. Let's look at Deuteronomy 17:15. This is a really important plan, design of God's. Deuteronomy 17:15-20.
(17 through 20),
15, I think.
15 through 20.
17, 15 through 20.
15.
Yep.
You shall surely set a king over you whom the Lord your God chooses, one from among your countrymen. You shall set as king over yourselves.
Okay, stop for just 1 sec, sorry. So when Deuteronomy was given, remember they wandered around the wilderness for 40 years till that generation died in the wilderness? Deuteronomy is like, I'm going to tell you again how you're going to live in the land. So it's almost a giving of what happened in Exodus, he's repeating here in Deuteronomy. So now he's telling them, this is how you're supposed to live in the nation of Israel. So go back, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're fine, okay. You shall surely set a king over you whom the Lord your God chooses, one from among your countrymen. You shall set as king over yourselves. You may not put a foreigner over yourselves who is not your countryman. Moreover, he shall not multiply horses for himself, nor shall he cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses. Since the Lord has said to you, you shall never again return that way. Neither shall he multiply wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he greatly increase silver and gold for himself. Through 20? Now it shall come about when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself a copy of this law on a scroll, in the presence of the Levitical priests, and it shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by carefully observing all the words of this law and these statutes, that his heart may not be lifted up above his countrymen, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment to the right or to the left, in order that he and his sons may continue long in his kingdom in the midst of Israel.
So here is God's provision and protection for the nation. And for every king, what were they supposed to do?
Write down that set of rules and read it every day.
Yeah, they were supposed to write the first 5 books of the Bible. Every king was supposed to write the first 5 books of the Bible, and then they were supposed to, what did you say?
Read it every day.
Yeah, read it every day for direction, for wisdom, for guidance, for an ability to lead the people. How many wives were they supposed to have that Solomon didn't remember 500 years from this point in time? What did you say?
Not many.
Not many.
Not many.
So 2, 3.
So the king was supposed to be a representation of God. And then they also had a prophet. All these kings had prophets. So the prophet's role was what?
Was to get the message from God
Yes.
and give it to the people.
To the people and to the king.
Yeah.
So it's almost like the designated pastor to the nation and to the king, and giving truth, as well as the king was supposed to write it and read it, and this is how they're supposed to govern the nation. So when we read those verses in 2 Kings, we can really see what about the nation.
They abandoned everything.
How far they've strayed.
Yes. How far away from what's God's plan? Yes.
Can I get off just a little bit?
Yes.
Didn't long before they started having kings, didn't God try to talk them out of having kings? Am I?
No, you're right.
Okay.
You're right. And they said, we want to be like the other nations. And so they picked their first king, which was Saul. And God's king that he picked was David. That's exactly right.
God actually, I think through Jesse, prophet, tried to persuade the Israelites not to be a king, not to have a king.
Right,
Said, you don't need a king.
right,
You got me.
right.
Yeah, I'm your ruler. But they kept saying, oh no, we want a king. We want a king. We want to be like the other countries around us.
That's exactly right. That is exactly what happened. Okay, so if we think about why would God have them write the Bible? What did he tell them he wanted from them? And that's it. Look at verse 20. What did he say that he wanted from the king? And how reading the Bible, what would it do?
His heart would be in tune with his fellow countrymen, essentially.
His heart would be right. And what else do we see? Really right with God. And what else do we see about reading the Bible and writing it?
there won't be any discussion on what the law is.
There won't be
You'll-
what?
There won't be any discussion on what the law is. If you're reading it and writing it, you know it.
You know.
Fear of God, that's an important one. Instilling fear, that's what it does, it instills the fear of God in reading it.
Okay, so there's a respect for God
Yeah.
that it instills. Notice what would not happen in his heart in his relationship with the people he was actually in charge of.
It'd be on the same line.
He wouldn't consider himself better.
Yeah, exactly. So there
Humbling,
would
it's
be.
humbling.
Yep, he would be humble. Would be
Well, in
humble.
writing it, they didn't have Bibles like we do, so if they were writing it, they would have something to keep with them and learn.
They had the scroll, they had the, yeah, and that's
I mean,
what they had.
individual.
But you're right, you're exactly right, and that's why, and it's really, what would the result be? If they did this, what would the result be in the nation and in their ability to rule? What would the result be?
Prosperity.
There would be. They would rule a long time. So what can we learn from looking at just this point in time in history and what God instructed them to do and what happened to them as a nation? What can we learn practically that affects our own lives?
To stay in his word daily and be prayerful.
To be conscious of our idols in our lives that are taking this place.
Okay?
All of our relationships ought to be filtered through this lens. Otherwise, we're going to be tempted to make the relationship itself the basis for our understanding, which is a trap. And it's easy to fall into that trap.
Even back then, God shows that the Word has a profound impact on the human heart. What else? Anything else you wanted to? We see His patience, but what else do we see? We see God's patience.
And you see what happens when his patience is lifted.
Yep, there is a point where He will do exactly what He said.
You see the reward and you see the punishment.
Okay, despite being a chosen nation, I think we know the answer to this. How much did idolatry consume Israel's leadership and the people?
Completely.
Took over their life.
It took over their life. So you kind of, you said it just a minute ago, Elaine. So the southern kingdom, that's where Daniel opens up in 605 BC, and they get taken into Babylon. And so where the nation did not turn, and God kept pleading with them to turn to Him, they were taken in 605. So 100 and some years after the northern kingdom was taken into Assyria in 722 BC, the southern kingdom was taken into Babylon in 605 BC. So how would you define idolatry?
Passion.
Passion? Okay, anybody else?
Basically, valuing things higher than you value God. That's where you put your focus on.
I was thinking of worship.
Something that's the forefront of your mind. Oh, that's worship. That's worship. Same thing.
Can be this too. D.L. Moody said, whatever you love more than God is your idol. So let's turn to 2 Timothy 4:3. Would somebody read that?
For the time will come when people will not put up with the sound of doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear.
One more verse.
They will turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to myths.
What does that have to do with idolatry? The word is not used there, obviously.
Well, I think idolatry on the base level, it's kind of like a projection of yourself, something that satisfies yourself. And if God doesn't meet that quota, it's a substitute. And so talking here, not enduring sound doctrine, it's a removal of God, a substitution for something that makes sense to us, which is what we all do. Nobody's exempt from that. So it's not something to boast over, like, look at them. We all have the temptation to do this very thing daily. There's those challenges daily. But it's a substitute. It's a substitute for God. And where does that substitution come from? Our pride, our sense of purpose, if you will. And if it doesn't align with God because God's telling us something different than what's naturally what we're desiring, that temptation, that's where the substitution of God comes into play. It's an idol, whatever that is. So many different forms of idolatry.
And so often we read something like that and we wouldn't even really think about idolatry playing into the response of people that want to have their ears tickled. I want to hear what I want to hear. How would that relate to our culture today?
It's everything. It's everywhere.
That is our culture today.
God being pulled out of everything.
Truth is relative. My truth is my truth, your truth is your truth. Therefore truth does not exist. It's
And
subjective.
Right? And what about sin?
No such thing.
Yeah.
You're offending
Yes,
somebody if you
yeah.
talk about sin
Yes.
today. And it didn't used to always be that way. What about, do you think that the culture has, where is the culture pushing into the church?
We're bigots.
Okay. Okay.
I think the hypocrite one is merited. I think they have a lot of reasons to poke at us, and I think that's why we ought to really watch our own footing, right? I mean, there's a lot of valid criticisms of the church from outside the church, and there's a reason, I think, why people don't want to have anything to do with the church. It's not because we believe in a God and that God has rules, it's because they watch us. And it's a big deal how we treat them.
It is a big
Because if
deal.
we're representatives of God or Christ and we don't treat them the way that Christ ought, we profess that Christ treated us, we're worthless.
And it is a big deal, but let's go another step in that and then go, I know I'm not everything I need to be, and that's exactly why I come to church.
Hospital for sinners.
It is.
And I'm a sinner.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's why I'm here.
Yes. And that's we need to hold those two things together and go, I need to be transformed. I need to be changed. I'm not everything that God wants me to be, and that's why we're here.
That's why Jesus died on the cross.
Exactly. But I think then where Donnie's going with that is it's so important for us to be humble and say that's who we are.
What's the easiest way to do that? If we can remember, but remember what Christ did for us personally. And if we can't remember, I think that's a red flag for us personally. Let's go back to where we began. Because if we can't remember, that means we're not operating out of that free gift. We're operating out of what we think we've already obtained. And that's
I
all.
think that verse was also saying that even though you tell somebody with love and, you know, about your doctrine, then they're not gonna accept it anyway.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you even give them sound doctrine and they don't accept it, it doesn't, I mean, it's like, you could be said as nice as possible, then it doesn't really matter. You know, you're still gonna be called a hypocrite whether you say it one way or the other.
And that can be true. It can be true.
And that reminds me of something you keep telling me. That's the whole scattering the seed thing. And it's like, I can't worry about the process or how somebody's gonna react to something. It's so much more important to just to take that head on, like we're called to, and just scatter the seed. And then relent ourselves of that responsibility at that point, because God says we don't grow it.
Yeah, but it's also if you're too worried about being called a hypocrite, then you don't ever sow anything.
Oh, no, that's not what
Yeah,
I meant
yeah.
about the
Well, I'm
hypocrisy.
saying, you can get to that point where it's like, you're too worried about what the world is saying about you, that you don't do anything about, you know what I mean?
Yes.
It's like,
But it goes
It's
back
crazy.
to that hospital for sinners, and we have to keep that mindset, and we have to keep the humility with that mindset and go, I'm not everything I'm supposed to be.
And that's how the conversation ought to be in the evangelism, precisely that. Because if we lord
Why we
ourselves over anybody, they're lost at that moment. They don't care. Why would they want to hear me tell them how much better I am than they are, and that they need to get with it because I got it figured out? Nobody wants to hear that.
Right.
And that's not coming from a place of humility. That's coming from, hey, I'm judging you right now. I'm telling you, you better get with it. There's depth to
people
to
do
it.
want to hear your trials and tribulations and how you made it through it. So I think you gotta have to like, you can't say nobody wants to hear it. Well, we ask.
And you
wants to hear
say
it,
with
or-
an
yeah.
attitude.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
I'm
But
saying
you're
people
right.
do want to hear it because
You're exactly right. They
there are
use
people that
story.
hear it and say, yeah, I understand that. It makes sense to me. Some people might be the first day they hear it. It might be the Lord continually knocking on them, saying, "This is what happened to me. I'm in the same situation. This is what happened to me. I'm kind of in the same situation." So it's like,
It's related.
if you're
Yeah.
frozen by being scared of what the world is thinking about you being a hypocrite, then you're never going to do anything. And the world is one.
Yeah.
So getting past that, but you also can't just say like, you have to do it with love and affection. You can't just do it with a fist, right?
You're right.
And I think the point I was trying to address in terms of hypocrisy is we've all got it, so we gotta tread very carefully. Cause it's so easy to go into any conversation with anybody and be like, hey, I'm better than you. We don't have to say that to them, but that's hypocrisy immediately right there, and we ought to shut up at that point.
And their experience actually could be telling them that even
Yeah.
in some other
So do I wanna
situation.
add to their interference with coming to the church, or do I actually wanna humble myself?
Right.
Call out my own hypocrisy and be honest with them. Not share every dark detail, but point being, hey, I'm just like you,
Right.
but I found a solution.
Right.
And it's not me. And back on the whole world, the world gives us lots of solutions. It's predominant right now in terms of what we need to satisfy ourselves. The main prevailing theme that I keep hearing over and over is you just gotta love yourself more. The whole reason why we have problems is because we love ourselves too much. And that's been throughout history, but right now that's culturally, that's huge in culture right now, and I don't think it's gonna go away. So we're narcissistic culture raising more
I mean,
narcissists.
you kind of see what's been there since David and before that. It's just, that's human nature. That process is there. So it's getting past that and knowing it in yourself to where you're worshiping and following God, and that you can help other people see that, that differentiation.
By you, by who you are, by what you
about
represent.
what God can do with
For
you.
sure.
Right.
For sure.
So go back to 2 Timothy 4, 3-4, and how would we look at these verses and go, and let's look at it for ourselves personally and say, yeah, John.
Go ahead, finish what you were asking.
Well, I want us to look at this and really kind of go, it's really speaking to idolatry. It's really speaking to idolatry in our culture. And how am I, how am I interacting with what it has to say? Yeah, John.
If you read that in verse 3, time will come when them will not endure sound doctrine, but wanting to have their ears tickled, they'll accumulate for themselves teachers in accordance to their own desires. That is the way the culture is this day. The concept of moral relativism is what people love to hear, want to hear. That way they can disavow what the doctrine of God is. And that's the idol that we have nowadays. And it's just like what Donnie was talking about, the meism. The meism, you know, I'm not bad. Look at all the things that have happened to me, and this is why I am like I am. You know, I've
So
got
are-
the excuses to behave. like
We have become our
So
own
are
idols,
we-
essentially.
Yeah, it's meism, self-centeredness.
And are we vulnerable to that?
Oh, yeah.
As
Oh, yeah.
believers, are
That's
we
human
vulnerable
nature.
to
Oh, yeah.
that?
And that's exactly what this time has come.
Yeah.
Yes,
Paul prophesied that
we're
when he
living.
wrote that,
Yep.
and it has happened.
So why, okay, they won't endure sound doctrine. What's the purpose of sound doctrine? And
A
you-
base, a home base, somewhere you can always go back to.
Okay,
No matter how lost you get, you can
It's
go. It's a
way
reference
to
point.
measure
Yeah.
okay.
what is right and what is
And
wrong.
the doctrine doesn't change. It's like you have
Okay.
the foundation. This is what it's gonna be no matter what. Cause if you have a foundation that's like, no, it's gonna be here today, it's gonna be here tomorrow, it's gonna be here then. It's always a moving target, you never get anywhere.
Okay, and so what's the purpose of sound doctrine in our lives?
Having a firm foundation.
Okay, a firm foundation,
A God, essentially.
Okay.
Do we have a God or not?
okay?
Yeah.
And it transposes through the different cultures.
Yeah.
What we consider moral relativism in, you know, Judeo-Christian culture, Western culture, would be something completely different than, and say in in Syria or Nigeria or in Southeast Asia or something. That is a completely different culture, but the doctrine of God is the same no matter where you are in this world, or if you're floating in space and if there's a planet out there with other creatures on it, it's the same there.
Okay, so if we look back and the king had to write it, okay, had to write the first 5 books of the Bible, and he's writing it, and what was the result gonna be in his life?
Be in his heart, he would know it.
Humility. Yeah.
He was gonna be humble, he was gonna know it in his heart, and it was gonna affect who he is. And so the reason that someone doesn't endure sound doctrine is because sound doctrine is calling us to do what?
Surrender our pride.
Or yes, that's along those lines, to adjust our lives to what God is saying.
To be uncomfortable.
Yes, to be uncomfortable and to adjust our lives to what God is saying. And really, that's what this is saying. So when we challenge what God says, instead of allowing us to change our minds, hearts, and behavior, we do the opposite. God adjust to us.
Yep. Thank God. You can see that happening in, all the churches today, like, they're changing God to fit their purposes, whatever the purpose is.
God must become contemporary in order to become relative to us.
Okay, so let's make a list here. What kinds of things can we love more than God?
Myself is number one on the top for everybody. I don't care who you are. It's everybody.
It is the number one on my list as well.
I know you love yourself way too much. Way too much.
So you mean like a career?
Materials,
So you're
things.
talking
Yes,
about
those
example,
can be.
career,
Yeah.
yeah, and,
Okay, so career.
mhm,
My children.
Family, yeah.
I've never done that.
No. Unfortunately, you haven't, Jay. We can make a study about this
Maybe
too.
we need to put an asterisk by that.
What
Sometimes
else?
we can see why.
So we can
Stay
say-
out of it.
We can say relationships in general, right? Could be a spouse, could be a friend,
And even religion,
okay, religion.
yeah.
Yeah.
When
Yeah,
it
that's
becomes
a
an
big one.
organization and stuff, and it's not really focused on God.
It's a big one.
What else? What else can be, now, these don't have to be an idol, right? But they become an idol when?
When it becomes our number one priority.
When I love these
More than God.
more than God. Okay, what else?
Your possessions.
Possessions. Is that right? Did I spell that right?
I don't remember if it's one S or two in the first.
It is.
Close
It
enough.
is?
Close enough.
3 S's.
Thank you, close enough,
Actually,
thank
it's
you.
4 S's.
Four.
See, 1, 2, and then
Okay, got you. What else?
Thoughts?
What else do we spend our lives on?
Time,
Okay,
that's my worst one.
Well, yeah, what we spend our time on.
Just the possession of time. You
Okay.
don't, that's God's. But
Well, I think time's a
I
big
try to
issue.
control my time.
okay. How about this?
Oh, entertainment, yeah.
How about this? Have you been in an airport recently? Look, everybody is on the phone. Anywhere we go.
They're in restaurants.
The restaurant,
They're not
with your
talking, they're
family.
looking at their phone.
Exactly, this is, I mean,
Maybe they're reading their Bible.
Food.
Right?
Speaking of restaurants.
It says the man holding a phone.
Right.
That's the funny part is you're like, use cell phones. There's the Bible. Your guy could be reading the Bible.
It
Maybe
is
we should
so-
have a service one time where no electronics, just bring your paper.
Yeah,
You can say vices in general, you know.
okay.
They're gonna be real Southern Baptist then. We can start going further down that line.
But we can look at this
Probably
list
find
and
some
not,
snakes
no,
out there.
nothing on this list has to be an idol. And it's so easy for us to look at Israel, really? Really you behaved that way? Really you did that? And then we look at Judah and go, really you did that? And God warned you and he said, don't put anything ahead of me. And then any of these things can be more important to us. How about security? Think of it.
We're right there with them.
We are right there with them.
So I have to ask the obvious, or at least for me, the obvious question. So when is it okay for the things that are important to us, where we can align ourselves with items on this list? When is it acceptable? Because I mean, there's a reason why we are who we are, what we're interested in, our interests, and what drives us towards those personal interests.
Right?
When it doesn't replace God.
For sure, but I'm just saying, like, if we take a hard look at ourselves, there are times where things can step in there. I'm just saying I get what you're saying. It's that simple. It is that simple. It's
Well,
just
how about these questions?
like okay, real quick. So if a relationship goes bad and you're totally invested in that part of your relationship at that point, that's 100% what your focus is on. And maybe God's, I don't know. There's so many different ways. I'm gonna shut up now. There's so many ways to go about it.
So how about answering these things? Where do I spend my time?
But how much is enough time? In Bible reading, in study, in praying, how much is enough?
I have to go with what John said about religion too, because there's the trap there for me personally. Is if I say, well, I have to do this, I have to do that, then I become a religious person, and that's not what God's after either. So there's always like a back and forth motion with these things for me personally, and that's a dangerous spot for me. My intentionalities become my vices in a sense.
I don't know where it is in the Bible, but it says without ceasing.
Pray without
So-
ceasing.
So you have, whatever you're doing, God's with you kinda on your mind in every instance.
He's right there. He's your reference point. Yeah.
I've heard that described, pray without ceasing, as a prayer arrow to God. And you just throw, that person comes to mind, and you just say something to God. You know, that you know something, there's a reason for that person coming to mind. And you say something to God. And so without ceasing is more along those lines. It's like, as we function, we're functioning in the sense of, God, you're real, God, you're here, I'm living in the light of you being here.
It's constant communication with God.
Well, and just kind of to address what you're saying, how much time is enough? I think I've battled with that in my life too, but what we do is we do it until you feel like, and I don't mean to stay there for all day, all hours of the night, but you do it until there's a sense of satisfaction. He doesn't have a set time that you need to do it. You do it until you feel like you've pleased him or you've heard from him. Like if you're being quiet and you're just having a quiet time, You know, there is no set time, and if 5 minutes is all you have, he honors that.
Well,
He's-
and the
he's not
bottom
condemning
line,
about any of that.
and the bottom line, when we're reading the Bible, it's us reading the Bible and God talking to us through the Bible, and we're actually engaging God relationally around the Bible.
Can I throw one more dart out there in the air? So,
Sure.
I think a big idol is conflict for any one of us. If somebody hurts us personally, that can be in business functions, that can be in personal relation functions. That is a big idol for all of us, because then we're like, screw them, and here's why I'm right. To me, I think that's bigger than the me thing, because it's me capitalizing on somebody else, judging that person. So we think we're good, we think our crap don't stink, but judging and all that stuff that we can do as Christians, but even you don't even have to be a Christian to be a judge over somebody. We all are so sensitive to our needs, our selfishness, that if somebody betrays that, again, business, personal relationships, just a person on the street, if they make us mad, or driving down the road in Midland, guess what happens, right? Like, I'm saying, that's how easy it is for us to have this idol. That
Well,
road rage, boom, that's my idol.
Yeah, and you know, that's why one of the questions here is, what do I think about? What do I spend time churning about? Where's my heart focused? Where's my pleasure focused?
Yeah, Donnie,
Those are the kinds of-
offense
Huh?
can be
Yeah.
an idol.
Yeah, it can be.
Worry
We
can
don't,
be an
Yeah.
idol.
It's an idol if it controls your life. And
it's what we
ahead
put
of God.
into it. It's the priority it is for us.
I mean, emotional reactions can, like he's saying, could be an idol, but not just once. It's got to be. It's like a repetitive motion. You know, it's like, this is what you do. This is what I do. These are my idols. This is what I put before anything.
And I think
It's not just like an emotional response to something bad happening.
Right. You know, you're exactly right.
And I'm thinking, was it Paul who said, take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ? That was Paul, right?
Right.
And that's why he put that verse there. It's like every thought, so I'm referring to the road rage, or whatever stupid thing we're so puffed up about that day. Like, that's what he said. And it's an easy thing to forget, because we get wrapped up in the passion involved. Passion was the word I used, and that's why idols, it's a passion. It's something that, it just burns inside of you. It's like that. It's that quick. So if we think what does Paul also say? If you think you're standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. You know, that's what he means by all that too. It's like, man, we really aren't as good as we think we are. That takes us back to the cross where we began. That's where we need to stay put, stay underneath the cross. Quit thinking we're so much better than everybody. Respect everybody, even if we don't agree with them or we think they're damned or whatever. It doesn't matter. We're not God. Like, the important thing is go back to where we began. I would say that over and over for myself. That's where I get screwed up. That's where I get messed up. I forgot where I came from. And I came from a lot of crap personally. And it's like, he did save me from a lot of stuff. And I need to remember that. And it's so easy for me to be mad at somebody because they've offended me.
Right.
It's really stupid, but I do it.
There's so many sins that matriculate from self. The judging, you know, that guy pulled out in front of me. Well, I'm the only person on the road. He's not supposed to pull out in front of me. It's all because of what we're thinking, what we're expecting, how our life is supposed to be, and if it doesn't match up, then it's a violation.
And that's true. So if we think about 2 Timothy 4, and we think about sound doctrine, and the purpose of sound doctrine is for us to adjust our lives to what God is saying. And we look at these lists, and you know, today it might be this. Tomorrow it might be this. The next day it might be this. And that's
Never.
Never.
It's a big control thing. It's like if you think you have control of your life, you think you have control of different things, but you don't really.
You're exactly right,
You
Dan.
don't have control of your life.
And are these things, can they be things to enjoy?
That was my question, yeah.
They can be.
You can, just
When,
don't turn your eyes away from the Lord.
right. Exactly right.
Anything that you put before Christ is an idol.
And we are just as guilty as the people that have gone before us.
Yeah.
And we are just as desensitized as the people who have gone before us in these areas of our lives.
And we're just as guilty as those who don't know God. Unfortunately, we are.
Yeah.
I think all of us can relate to those moments on a daily basis where we We get out of hand. Whether we share it with anybody or not, it's just true. That's the sin that still lives inside of us. Once again, that Paul referred to. Curse this body of death. We still struggle. So we're not better than anybody. And then back on his whole, what we just read in
Grace,
Kings.
so it was like, if you focus on everything that you've done bad in your life and you're not getting anywhere, if you're focused on that kind of thing and not on Christ, you're still, even though you're still stuck to where you were if you focus on what you were doing, right?
No, not necessarily.
Yeah,
Because
go
you're
back
going
to
back
number
to
one.
self.
You're going
This
back
is
to
a
self.
conversation about humility, though, and I
That's
think
what
the
I'm saying.
church.
When you have the humility, I mean, everybody has humility, but everybody's had things they focus on that they can put in front of God. So.
I just think we as Christians, that's probably one of our greatest temptations, is that we somehow got arrived at some point, some way, shape, or form, and that we somehow are distinct. And that's what's interesting. You had us read that verse in Kings. Why did he have the king right? So he would be humble, so he would be amongst his peers.
Right.
So that's a really interesting verse that you had us read there too.
Right.
We don't need to be better than anybody. So if anytime we're operating from that realm, I just got mad driving down the road.
Right.
I mean, it's everybody. We all do it. So
Right.
let's humble ourselves. Let's recognize where we screw up.
Right.
That's a start. Again, go back to the cross. Sit underneath. What did Christ do for me? I don't even know. Well, go back,
Right.
because you're freaking lost. You have no business telling anybody anything.
When we get to heaven, we'll be like Jesus. But here, it's a struggle to be like Jesus.
Lay your burdens down.
And Sean, what were you gonna say?
Donnie said something just a while ago, and he talked about how we are like, and he said something about, the non-Christian people. The difference is, we know where the example is. And it's not, with things that seem right worldly, the thing that, they cut in front of me and everything, yeah, according to the laws and the rules of this culture and everything, yeah, maybe I was in the right, but God has a different criteria. And we should know that, and that's why we need to stay in close communication and constant contact, like it says there in verse 3 in Timothy. That's the way we judge things, by God's standard, not by the world's standard.
And that's what changes us, so that there's balance. These things are imbalanced in our lives. We can enjoy, but not worship, not be consumed by, not be owned by. And at the end of the day, a couple of things that God wants me to learn about me. My need for right relationship with God is my greatest need. And when there's idolatry in my life, I have forgotten my greatest need. And I've forgotten who He is and how much I need Him, which we've been talking about. And it's central to human nature. It is so clear by looking at the history of the nation of Israel. It is central to human nature to substitute anything in my heart and life with things.
Can I ask one more stupid question?
Yep.
How do we not? And I think I know where we've talked about it. I just have to ask it again or whatever, but how do we not get on the path of religion? I think there's a reason why Christ tells us He's going to set us free so that we are unburdened. But in terms of something like this, like my mechanical brain, I hate the way it works sometimes because I can be enjoying something and then I sit there and dissect it and I break it down into all these components and here's where it's wrong, here's where it's wrong. And it's just, you got to be able to sit back, just chill out, enjoy something.
And I think that's what you were driving at a couple of minutes ago. And that is, and so how do we enjoy the blessings and the good things that God has given to us to enjoy and have a balance there so that they aren't our idols? How is that possible? Any ideas? Any thoughts? And then we'll quit on that.
Using them for God's benefit, for the benefit of the kingdom on earth.
Okay? For God's benefit, for His kingdom?
doing stuff for other people.
And that's what I'm saying, if you, like, I've heard say, you know, let me show you to people this day, you know, we're, even though you're doing some of these things, you're incorporating the behavior.
You have brought up a really good point, because these things will take us places. And it's more the places that they take us to than anything else, because God is putting things into us and then taking us to these places. And that's the point of them, as well as to, it's okay to enjoy. It is okay.
If every place you go is a mission field.
That's a good point.
Um,
That's a good point. Anybody else?
And they focus on it, that it's a relationship, not a religion.
Yeah.
Build on Jesus, make that relationship with him, so he can get you through all of whatever you're going through.
And it's he that brings us into balance. We are out of balance, and he continues to work on our hearts and our minds to bring us into balance, to remind us of what matters, what really, really matters in our lives, and to invest in what really matters. Anybody else?
Well, the more that we do that, the more that we realize our greatest need is God. And that relationship, he does change our hearts. As the more we realize that, and the more we're in the Word, the more that he's on our mind, the more, then maybe when that guy pulls out in front of me, I'm not going to pull out my gun.
Use your pointing finger instead of the middle one, right?
Good point. Use that finger, right?
But
Move to the what? What are you doing?
Thank you for pulling out in front of me.
There you go.
But isn't God trying to get us to the place where we enjoy him here? That doesn't he want us to enjoy him here? And then these things fade or are in the place where they need to be.
So I'm thinking now too, like our lack of enjoyment for God is a lack of trust, because we don't believe he's sufficient enough. And that's where idolatry comes in. We neglect the sufficiency of God in our own life.
And isn't that, I had Genesis 3:1 on there, isn't that what happened in the garden?
Yeah.
They walked with God.
Yeah.
And the enemy came along and said, you can be like him and you won't need it. And he's been working that into our lives. What?
The temptation with that beautiful fruit. Huh?
Right?
Yeah.
And he's been working that same idea into all of our lives every single day. You don't need him. Life will work without him. And that's really what you need. Anybody else? Okay, next week, we're going to look at the 40 years, so like right up until the time, and a little bit after Daniel goes into captivity, Manasseh had a grandson. His name was Josiah. He's actually a pretty amazing king, and we're going to look at him next week. It's pretty amazing that it really says you can be different than your family. And that's really powerful.
Boy, we need that, don't we?
We sure do.
Amen.
He looks at me.